As the echo of high heels hit the cobblestone streets on a rainy night in the Whitechapel District of London, a woman looking to earn enough money to get her through another day passes by a dark alley. A whisper beckons her into the darkness. It was August 31st in 1888, and Mary Ann Nichols comes face to face with the soon-to-be infamous serial killer of all time, Jack the Ripper. Prostitutes, or ladies of the night, were often subjected to attacks and even murder. Usually these crimes would go unnoticed, as anything associated with prostitutes wouldn't be discussed in polite society. That was until the gruesome murders by the Whitechapel butcher grabbed everyone's attention. Mary's body was discovered in Bucks Row by two men on their way to work. Her throat was slashed and her body was disemboweled. The way she was brutally killed and discarded was shocking to all. The Whitechapel District was an overcrowded and poverty-stricken area full of crime and violence. The narrow streets were dark and tangled like a labyrinth of confusing twists and turns. Jack the Ripper was able to kill and then easily disappear into the night. And he did, 4 more times. Jack the Ripper terrorized the city and claimed the lives of 5 women, better known as the Canonical Five. Many people suspect he murdered more people, up to 11 women in total. But today we're just going to speak about the Canonical Five he is known for. After Mary's death, police began questioning prostitutes in the area. Most of the women named a man they referred to as Leather Apron, as he tormented them while shaking them down for money. The local papers caught wind of this and published an article about a single man being responsible for the murder. The locals began to suspect that Leather Apron was a man named John Pizer, as he was the man who spent time pestering the prostitutes in the area. Unfortunately for the police, Pizer was able to provide an alibi for the murder and was no longer a suspect. On September 8th, 1888, Jack the Ripper struck again, this time killing Annie Chapman, leaving her mutilated body in Hanbury Street. This time, Jack decided to take a token from the murder, Annie Chapman's womb. This act led police to believe that the killer had some basic understanding of anatomical knowledge based on how Annie's womb was removed. Could he possibly be a doctor? As rumors spread through the Whitechapel District, a letter was received by the Central News Agency on September 27, 1888. It was from the Whitechapel butcher, and it read, "Dear Boss, grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me and my funny little games. My knife so nice and sharp. I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." 3 days after the letter was received, Jack the Ripper struck again, twice, on the same night. Elizabeth Stride was found dead on Burner Street with nothing but her throat cut. It appeared to have been done with urgency, almost as if the murderer was about to be interrupted, but managed to flee just in time. Not to be undone by his unfinished work, the Ripper struck again, killing Catherine Eddowes in a nearby Mitre Square just 45 minutes after killing Elizabeth. He must have had more time with Catherine, as her neck was slashed, her face was mutilated, and her left kidney, right ear, and uterus were removed. This time, people had reported seeing a man walking with Elizabeth before she was murdered. Jack the Ripper was described as a stocky man in his 30s, standing 5 foot 5 inches tall with a fair complexion and a mustache. He was seen wearing a dark overcoat and a bowler hat. The streets of London were being terrorized, and the police were being berated by letters from people claiming to be Jack the Ripper, or citizens handing out the names of people they suspected to be the murderer. One man named George Lusk received a letter on October 16th from Jack the Ripper. George was the head of the Mile End Vigilance Committee, which was a group of local businessmen who were keeping watch for sightings of the murderer. The letter was addressed "From Hell" and was accompanied by half a human kidney. Everyone believed the kidney belonged to the recently murdered Catherine Eddowes. However, it was soon discovered that the letter and the kidney were sent as a prank by a medical student. I'm telling you, those medical students and anatomy professors are shady. If you haven't heard of Dr. Robert Knox, he taught classes at the anatomy school in Edinburgh, Scotland. He looked the other way when 2 men, serial killers Burke and Hare, brought him fresh corpses on the regular. So there you go. As the cold air started to creep through the city streets, Jack the Ripper spent the evening with his last victim. On November 9th, 1888, Mary Kelly's body was discovered by her landlord's assistant. She was found in her home, in bed, and her murder was by far the most gruesome out of all of Jack's victims. Her landlord described the murder by saying, "The sight we saw I cannot drive away from my mind. It looked like the work of a devil than that of a man." Mary's body was disemboweled and described as virtually skinned down. It was extensively brutal because Jack the Ripper could take his time, without fear of being interrupted, as he was hidden within Mary's home. I always assumed that Jack the Ripper had to be a doctor or a medical student, purely based on my knowledge of the murders of Burke and Hare. However, looking into how he murdered these women, only taking 1 or 2 organs rather than the entire body with hopes of learning about anatomy like a medical student may do, he didn't. So now I'm not so sure who he could have been. One of the criminal investigators said that mutilation was the main goal, and the killer may have suffered from homicidal impulses brought on by nymphomania. As Jack the Ripper's true identity was never discovered, we are left with several people who were suspected to be the murderer. Out of the many suspects, I believe that there are 2 that seem more suspicious than the rest. Aaron Kosminski was a man from Poland who in 1889 was found threatening a woman with a knife. He was sent to an asylum to live out the rest of his life. During Kosminski's time living in London, he was very vocal about his hatred of women, especially prostitutes. He was seen in Mitre Square, where Catherine Eddowes' body was found on the night of the double murder, matching the description of the man who was seen with Elizabeth Stride, the other victim of the night. It's quite suspicious that the murder stopped once he was locked away in the asylum. One of the other suspects is Joseph Barnett. He had formerly been living with the last of Jack's victims, Mary Kelly. He was madly in love with her, even calling her his wife, which they weren't. They were just roommates. Joseph hated the fact that Mary was a prostitute. He disagreed with the lifestyle and worked a job that provided enough money to keep her off the streets. That was until he lost his job, which forced Mary back to being a lady of the night to make ends meet. Mary ended up bringing home a few other prostitutes, which sent Joseph into a fit of rage. He got so angry that he moved out, and just 10 days later, Mary was murdered. Some people suspect that Joseph committed some of the first murders in an attempt to scare Mary enough to keep her off the streets. He was also close to Mary, so the other prostitutes knew him, so he could easily get close to the women before taking their lives. Not only that, Joseph matched the physical profile and was often called Jack by his friends. What makes him even more suspicious is that Mary Kelly was murdered in her home. Although Joseph had claimed he lost the key to their previously shared dwellings, some people suspect that he knew how to get into the house, with or without a key, and would easily be able to walk in undetected. Mary Kelly was Jack the Ripper's last victim. Perhaps if the killer was Barnett, he felt he no longer had to kill to protect Mary now that her life was gone. There are several other suspects, even some with an interest in surgery or anatomy. Neither of the two subjects I mentioned had any experience in anatomy as far as I know. So really anyone could have been Jack the Ripper. Do you think we'll ever solve the mystery? The case is over 100 years old now, and it's still unsolved. There may still be time, such as how the Golden State Killer was caught through a simple DNA ancestry test taken by one of his family members years after the murders. So who knows? Perhaps future technology will uncover the true identity of Jack the Ripper. Thank you so much for listening to Everything is Spooky in the Dark, the podcast for WanderingCrystal.com.